Hi there, it's me, Dr. Carla Marie Manley, joining you today to talk with you about toxic relationships. It's so important in this time, it's actually all the time, to be aware of how toxic relationships affect us, but no more important time than right now, where so many of us are feeling isolated, we are feeling constrained in our relationships, and we might be in situations where we feel that toxic energy is coming up because of so much proximity to people. And sometimes the people that we're most proximate to are those that are not really good for our spirit, for our soul, and our mental health. And so I really wanted to share time with you today to talk about how you can notice when this is happening, to know that it's not your fault, and then to offer you some strategies for dealing with this so that you don't feel alone, so that you don't end up in abusive or chronically abusive situations, so that you can find your freedom, your stability, and your inner strength. So what I'd like to talk with you about to begin with, and feel free to send me questions. I do have some questions that were sent to me in advance, and so I can address those. But if some come up for you during the discussion, feel free to send them during the Facebook Live or to email them to me, and I can address them at a later point. So here are some thoughts. Some people ask me, well, what is a toxic relationship? How can I tell if I'm in a toxic relationship? Well, one of the easiest ways to tell is, are you in relationship with someone? And it can be a significant other, a life partner, somebody you're dating, a sibling, a parent, somebody that you're working with, whether you're working remotely or in an environment where you're next to someone even during the pandemic, right? So how can we tell if we're in a toxic relationship? One of the easiest ways to tell is what it does to your spirit. So when we're around people who are good for us, we feel seen, we feel respected, we feel heard. When we're around people who aren't good for us, then we tend to feel as though we are diminished or flattened, or worse yet, abused, right? So your spirit will know, your inner being will know if you're in a relationship or you're being controlled, constrained, or constricted. Okay? So that's one way to tell. A question that I got from somebody was, could you please tell me if I'm being overreactive? My significant other tells me that we're not in a toxic relationship, that it's all in my head. Well, we can only look at this on an individual basis. If you're in a relationship where you're feeling abused, threatened, devalued, criticized, those sort of things, no matter what your partner says, your partner may not notice it. Your partner may be so used to being abusive that they don't, even notice it. And it doesn't have to be a partner. Again, it can be a parent. Really, what you have to go back to is your inner truth, so that you can ascertain how you're feeling, how you are doing in the here and now. And when you do that, you'll be able to tell if you're in a situation where you are feeling heard, you are feeling seen, and you're not being somehow devalued. So that's a really important piece, is to, again, keep coming back to your center. And then in line with that question is, well, maybe somebody is telling you that you are being too sensitive, right? And that's common in toxic relationships. Generally, it's okay to be sensitive. It's actually a good thing to be sensitive. Healthy sensitivity is a wonderful gift. Yet sometimes we do have to come back to center and saying, am I working my stuff? If somebody, isn't doing something toxic, yet I'm getting inflamed or triggered, is that something I need to work on within my own being? And sometimes that is what happens. But again, you really have to be able to step back a bit to gain some objectivity. Do you have some unresolved issues coming up that a person isn't intending to harm you, and you're just getting harmed because you have some work to do inside, and that's okay, and that's normal, and we all have our triggers, right? So that's a piece to notice. But again, going back to the true toxic type of relationship is where you may be sensitive, and again, that's okay, but where somebody uses your sensitivities, and this is a really important piece to know about toxic relationships. Sometimes a person uses your sensitivities to come after you, to trigger you, to hurt you, to cause you pain, and that pain can often be emotional pain. Sometimes it's actually physical pain, but we'll get to that in a minute, right? So just noticing that is this relationship causing you pain? Emotional pain, spiritual pain, right? So now let's take a step over here to abuse. That was another one of my questions. Does a toxic relationship always mean that I'm being abused? That was the question that came into me. Does a toxic relationship always mean that I am being abused? So let's define abuse. Abuse can be, we often think of abuse as physical abuse, yet truly there are many types of abuse. There's physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, verbal abuse, spiritual abuse, financial abuse, and they're not mutually exclusive. You can have many of those occurring at once, right? And so they're all types of abuse. And sadly, I've worked with domestic violence issues for a long time, and people will say to me, but I don't have any physical signs of abuse. And people won't believe me, or people tell me that it's not really abuse if I'm not black and blue. Well, trust this right here, right now. There definitely are forms of abuse, emotional abuse, spiritual abuse, verbal abuse, that can hurt as much as physical abuse, and sometimes more. Because as I've had clients tell me, a slap, a punch in the arm, those scars fade, those wounds fade, right? Not that they're okay. I'm not saying any type of abuse is okay. Yet verbal abuse, emotional abuse, spiritual abuse, that lingers in the system. So, does a toxic relationship always mean that you're being abused? No, not necessarily. A toxic relationship can be one where there's just really bad energy, where there is, here's a really good example. Sometimes somebody is in relationship, sensitive. I'm a sensitive, so just so you know that, I get sensitives. I am a sensitive person, and I prize that, and I treasure it. And I work with people to help them honor their own sensitivities and learn how to become stronger within that sensitivity and to use it to work for them. So sometimes you're in relationship, again, it can be a family member, a friend, a significant other, a romantic partner, where they're sarcastic. Example, and the sarcasm and the sarcasm and the sarcasm, which I'm not a big fan of sarcasm, by the way. I see most sarcasm as not very well disguised hostility, right? And so sometimes we're in a relationship with someone where they're not necessarily being abusive, but the sarcasm is grating, and it makes us feel devalued and confused, and so there's that piece. So it's not always abusive. So you can be in a toxic relationship that is not always abusive. So I'm getting a question in. It says, is a family member not willing to look at themselves and how they have hurt you a toxic trait? Oh, great question. It's a really super question. If a family member or anyone you are in relationship with has a toxic trait that feels toxic to you, and they are not willing to look at it, then that can be a sign of many things. Sometimes the person is, there could be many issues at work, right? Sometimes a person is in the midst of an addictive behavior, right? An addictive pattern. And when there's addiction at work, it's sometimes hard to see anything but the addiction. So that's a really common thing. Another piece is sometimes people are suffering from a mental health issue. and they're in the midst of very strong anxiety or overpowering depression or PTSD. And if they're not getting treatment or adequate treatment, sometimes it can feel so debilitating just to struggle with that mental health issue that it's hard to see beyond one's own needs, right? So, and again, I'm not saying that it's okay to not work on your stuff. I'm just explaining why somebody might not be able to. So really, if somebody is in a very healthy place and isn't suffering from a mental health issue and is working their work, and of course you can have a mental health issue and still be doing your work. It just depends on where are you in the continuum of managing that mental health issue. So if you have someone who is really doing their work and they're stable enough within their life, within any existing mental health issues, and then this is a very important piece, if they're able to work with you to communicate. And this is one of the best strategies for breaking free of a toxic relationship. So for the person who asked, and I'm looking over here at the question again, if a family member is not willing to look at themselves and how they have hurt you, a toxic trait, assuming that the person is emotionally, mentally capable of doing that. Again, this is assuming that they're capable of doing that. Then, and you invite them into being in a communicative mode with you, and you help them learn how to do healthy communication. So we're assuming that this person is willing to do healthy communication and that they know iMessages and reflective listening, and I'll talk about those in a minute. But if they are willing and know how to work through issues, then that's a really positive trait and a sign that maybe the toxic relationship can be healed. But if somebody is not interested in using healthy communication strategies, if they are not interested in deepening and healing the relationship, then yes, that would generally be a big sign of a toxic trait. Because I believe that one of the best skills that we all have within us, right, is the ability to learn to communicate in healthy ways. And so when we look at toxic relationships, one of the only ways to break free of them is to be in relationship with people who are willing and interested in engaging in healthy communication. And if you don't have both of those things, the willingness and the interest, of course we're presupposing that they have the ability, right? But if they don't have the willingness and the interest, then chances are that relationship will never heal, because you need both people to really want to change the dynamic. So I really want to offer that to you as a red flag, as a sign that if somebody is willing to show up, is willing to communicate with you, magic can happen. Absolutely, magic can happen if both people are on board with that. So then I'm looking at another question I had. Somebody had written in and said to me, what about dishonesty? What about if I'm in a relationship where I don't trust my partner? Is that a toxic relationship? Well, we have to look at this. If you don't trust your partner, is that something that you've carried in from prior relationships? Maybe from childhood issues that are not resolved? Or is it something that's happening in the here and now? And so let's assume that you have perhaps had some betrayal in the past, in your childhood, maybe in former relationships. And this relationship is someone, your significant other is showing up. He or she is doing their best to be a trustworthy partner, and yet you still feel like you can't trust anyone based on trauma from the past. That's not a sign of a truly toxic relationship. It's a sign of a relationship where one person has trust issues. And then that can be the self-work there. However, if the person you're in a relationship is engaging in behavior that is dishonest, where things that are said and done aren't congruent, then that's a really important sign of a toxic partner, or a toxic significant other, or a toxic family member. Because the behavior we really need, one of the foundations of a healthy relationship, just one of the key parts of life, of any healthy relationship, is the ability to show up in an honest way. And if you're in relationship with someone, again, brother, sister, mother, spouse, life partner, best friend, and that person is not showing up with trust, with being, trust is earned, right? And if somebody that you're in relationship isn't engaging in trustworthy patterns, it's likely that there's a lot of toxic patterns. There are a lot of toxic patterns at work. And so that's something that needs to be explored in the relationship, would be the dishonesty. And to be able to tell a person that you're in relationship, I feel, this is an example of an I message, not a you message. A you message would be, you are terrible. You lie to me all the time. Now here's an I message. I feel really scared because when you tell me one thing but do another, I feel like I can't trust you, and it really raises red flags for me, and I feel unsafe and unstable in this relationship. And what I really need is for your thoughts to come out in ways, and your words to come out in ways, and your behaviors to come out in ways that are congruent and trustworthy. And when you do that consistently, I will be able to build trust for you and with you. So that's one way you can handle a trust issue that might be affecting a relationship. Now, the other person's response, and this again is how trust is built. The other person says, no, it's all in your head, or I'm going to do my own thing. Well, big red flag. Chances are that relationship will just keep going down and down, because you really need somebody to show up and take accountability. So I really want to affirm this next piece, which is accountability. It's one of my big topics. I believe that we all make mistakes. I make mistakes every day of one sort or another. I hope they're small mistakes and easily fixable. But we all make mistakes in relationship. We're imperfect. We're human. And so one of the most important things is to be able, if somebody calls you out on something, to be able to look at what they're saying and say, okay, can I see that from that person's perspective? And if you can at all, and this isn't a right, wrong, good, bad thing at all, then it's about saying, oh my goodness, I can see that I hurt your feelings that way. Or I can see that you feel betrayed by that. And I apologize. I take responsibility for what I did. And I will do my very best to not do it again in the future. And if I do, please call me on it in the moment so that I can clean up right then and there. And it's one of my favorite things, actually, is taking accountability. Because although some people think that apologizing is a negative, that it makes them weak, I think that apologizing is one of the best things I can do if I really mean it, if I really see something that I could improve. Why? Because it's a learning opportunity. Not only is it humbling and it really makes me take accountability, but it also is a learning opportunity. I want to mention my book, Joy from Fear, and my other book, Aging Joyfully. And the reason that I thought of that is in my book, Aging Joyfully, I tried so hard to be gender neutral and inclusive, and yet a reader had written to me and said, this popped up for me and didn't feel as though you were being very inclusive. And of course, my first response, my heart went, oh no, I don't like making mistakes. But then when I was able to look at it, see it from their perspective, which is generally fairly easy to do if you get out of your own way, then I was able to write back to her, to thank her for her insight, to let her know what I would have done differently if I were able to rewrite the book in that one. Fortunately, it was just one sentence. And so I took accountability. I offered a cleanup of something that I could do to, make it right. And I felt so much better. I felt better about myself. I felt better about the book. I felt better about what had happened. And magic happened. She reached back to me and said, wow, you just gained so much in my eyes, something to that effect. So it was a win-win. by me taking responsibility, I grew, I learned, and I won't make that mistake again, I hope, in any other book. And so if we do that day by day in relationships, then we detoxify them. If we are able to show up, not with just an I'm sorry, because I'm sorries don't generally mean very much. The I'm sorry is when it's followed by I apologize. Here's where I take accountability. Here's where I see I erred. Here's where I'd like to do it better in the future. Will you let me move forward with you and call me on it if I do it again? How healing is that? How human is that? How beautiful is that? And so that is one of the things I think we can do to really work on toxic relationships if we're in one. And again, coming back to the key point here, you must have a person who wants to work with you. If the other person is unwilling to work with you on healing the toxic relationship, there's no hope. Now, here's one place that there is hope. If a person simply doesn't know, they don't have the skills, but they're willing, if you are willing to be in that journey of learning with them and growing with them and being their partner, this can be, again, a mother, a daughter, a sister, a brother, a best friend, an aunt, an uncle, anyone, a lover, a husband, a wife, a long-term partner. If the person is willing to be your partner in that journey, what a gift. What a gift. Because when we journey with someone forward in life in ways that allows us to help them, newsflash is that we grow. We grow because when we're helping someone move forward, we are actually, I look at it, I've often said, like climbing Mount Everest. If we continue to up-level each other in our relationships, we become stronger, and the person we're in that relationship with also becomes stronger. And so it's a win-win. But again, let me get back. I'm going to keep emphasizing this. If you are in relationship with someone who is not willing to show up, who is not willing to do the work, then success for the relationship is not likely. And here's the other piece that's very sad to me, that if you stay in that relationship, chances are you will be dragged down. You will become, and this actually brings tears to my eyes because I've been there. I've been in this situation. You will become a smaller version of yourself. And if you stay too long, you can become a ghost of yourself. And to me, that is so sad, so life-crushing, so spirit-crushing. And so I tell people, you have a choice. If you are in a toxic relationship, you have a few choices. One is to stay. Leave it as it is. For whatever reason, you say, hey, I have to stay. I'm just going to accept this as it is. And you choose to stay. And that's a choice. And sometimes making that choice is good enough. The other choice could be, I'm going to stay, but I'm going to work on it and see if I can engage this person in healing the relationship. That's another choice. And if you make that choice, you may or may not give it an amount of time and say, wait a second, I'll give it 30 days or 60 days or a year, whatever it is, to see if you're working with me. That's an option. Another choice is to leave the relationship, to end the friendship, to end the romantic partnership, to sever the connection with the family member. And that's really, to me, our last option when we've exhausted everything else, except if there is abuse involved. If somebody is physically harming you in any way, 911, domestic violence hotline, take it seriously. Do not tolerate abuse from anybody. And I just want to pause here. I'm getting a little fired up. If you are a child, a teenager, and a young adult, if you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, beyond, if anyone dares to lay a hand on you, dares to abuse you physically in any way, you call 911. If they try to take your cell phone or your computer away, You call 911 and find a way to get help. It's actually not legal to try and take somebody's cell phone away or phone away if they're trying to call for help. So I really want to say that some relationships are that toxic. And now that we're in the midst of this pandemic, I'm very sad to say that reports of child abuse are on the increase. And I want to pause here for a minute to say, if you are in an abusive situation, call 911. Get help. No one should ever take their pent-up frustrations, aggressions out on another human being. It is not acceptable. It is not fair. It is not human. And so if somebody is being abusive, please take it seriously. And besides 911, there are domestic violence resources. You can actually look on my website at drcarlamanley.com, and you can even text for support. If you can't call the domestic violence hotline, there is a national hotline. You can text for support. So please. So that said, physical abuse is one thing, but there is also emotional, verbal abuse. And because many of us are isolated with people who are maybe addicted to substances, maybe dry drunks, maybe substance abusers of another sort, maybe they're just mean people. And so for some of these people who do not process, they don't have the intelligence, the emotional intelligence to work on and process their own feelings in safe, appropriate ways, they sometimes take them out on other people, their children, their other family members, their spouses, their pets, the elders that maybe they are entrusted to care for. If you are aware of any of these things, of course, report the person. Verbal abuse, again, no form of abuse is acceptable, and they are all reportable. So if somebody is taking advantage of you physically, spiritually, emotionally, financially, in any way, you deserve support. So now that I've said that, and it's a really big issue, and I am also, if somebody messages me and doesn't feel capable of making a report on their own and wanted to email me, I would be happy to do whatever I could on my end to be of assistance, even if that means giving you the necessary information you would require to make a report and to get the help and support that you deserve. So that's a piece there. So let's move back to toxic relationships. And what I'd like to do is look at another question where somebody wrote to me and said, my partner triggers me all the time and seems to just want me to get into a battle. Is this normal? Absolutely, that's not normal. That is one of the signs of a toxic relationship. If you are in relationship with somebody who's constantly trying, or even occasionally trying, to get you to respond in a negative way, maybe they make comments about what you're not doing right, maybe they're hypercritical, maybe they just know exactly that soft spot in your spirit, how to get to you. It might be a comment about your child or your pet or the way you dress or what you've eaten or not eaten or whatever it is. Unacceptable. That is toxic behavior. That is abusive behavior. So one of the best things you can do is to not take the hook. And this is one of the pieces of psychology that I really like, is that we can control our responses. We might not be able to control what's going out there in the world, but if somebody's trying to get to us, one of the things we can do is ignore them. And sometimes it's so hard. We want to talk back. We want to fight. We want to stand up for ourselves. Well, particularly if you can't get out of the way of the relationship, get out of the relationship right now because of that pandemic, sometimes the best thing you can do is to just be quiet. Turn and leave the room and find your headphones. Find a TV show. Find a friend to talk to unload. So again, don't engage. If people are being unkind, don't engage. And there's something called an extinction burst. And let me explain this. Sometimes when you stop doing a behavior that somebody is used to you doing, it gets a little worse and a little worse and a little worse because they want to draw you back into it. They eventually realize you're not going to be drawn back in. And it bursts. and then the behavior goes away. But sometimes it gets a little worse before it gets better. So again, hold strong to your center. Try not to engage with people that are unhealthy. And of course, reach out for support anytime you need it. It is there for you. It might be scary to reach out for support, but reaching out for support when you're hurting is one of the most courageous things you can do. And it is very likely that you will be met with loving, considerate care. So whether you reach out to a hotline, a therapist, a best friend, people who love us, therapists, people who care about us, right? We don't judge this sort of thing. We just know that it's a part of the human condition. And so when you reach out for support, you needn't worry that you'll be judged. If the person is a good person, a loving friend, a competent therapist, a wonderful hotline worker, you will be met with support, right? And if you're not, that is that person's problem, not yours, right? And so again, sometimes when we're working with toxic relationships, the best thing we can do is to reach out for some objective guidance and support. And sometimes that is from a mental health care provider, sometimes that's from a support group, sometimes it's from a best friend. But again, I've given you quite a few tips and tools here for you to work on. Then I had another question, which was, what was it? Deflection. What is deflection? It seems like my boyfriend is always deflecting with me. And this is a comment I hear a lot in one form or another, where a significant other, a partner, a best friend says to their friend, you know, this is bothering me, this thing that's happening between us, I'm really bothered. And instead of addressing that piece right there, the person goes off on a tangent and they talk about what you might have done wrong, or the fact that the eggs weren't cooked right, or that you didn't pick up the dog poop, or that you had one too many beers. And instead of addressing the issue that's right here, right now, they deflect to something else. And so that is something to notice that is often an issue in toxic relationships, that a person will deflect, and instead of bringing it back to the table, back to the issue. And here's a great tool for that. When I'm working with someone who tends to deflect, I will say, as they bring up a concern, I'll say, oh, I hear that. Let me write that down. Okay, let's go back to here. We'll address that one next, but let's go back to this right now. And so, for example, if you say, hey, sweetheart, it really upsets me that you continually are late for dinner, but you don't bother calling me and telling me that you're running late. And the person says, well, yeah, but you forgot to pick up your shoes. Okay, let's write that down. I'll write that down over here, but let's talk about this. Let's talk about maybe we can create some sort of agreement that if you're going to be more than 5 minutes late for dinner, please just text me in advance so that I'm not waiting for you and I can choose to eat on my own or not. And then once we resolve that, we'll talk about my shoes. And then indeed, you can talk about the shoes later. Maybe they do need to be picked up a little bit better. Okay, we can handle that. So that's one thing to know about deflecting that crops up a lot in relationships. And then there was one more question. Oh, this is a big one. A guy actually wrote into me and said, my girlfriend constantly shuts down when I'm trying to work on things with her. Is this a sign of a toxic relationship? Yes. Yes. Shutting down, although we often think that a toxic relationship is one where two people are going at each other. Abuse. That's definitely overtly toxic, right? And you also see that in relationships where people fight, have make-up sex, Toxic. For a lot of reasons. I can talk about that later. Not good habits. It's not good habits to form around emotional intimacy and sexual intimacy, right? We want to build our habits from a place of love, not toxicity. So the other piece, going back to the shutting down piece, is that if somebody is shutting down on you, likely it is their way of coping. And again, coping mechanisms, you may have heard this from me before, but coping mechanisms are things that arise in childhood. We don't do them consciously. We just learn our coping mechanisms from childhood and trying just to do our best to stay alive, sometimes in very difficult childhood environments or very toxic childhood environments. And so we unconsciously pick up all of these coping mechanisms. Some are healthy, like maybe going to your room when mom and dad are fighting and putting music on. Absolutely healthy. Sometimes it's fighting with somebody as, hey, you can't take my book, you can't, steal my clothes. And so we use all of these coping mechanisms. But we were kids when we learned those. So part of our responsibility as adults is to find out what coping mechanisms we use that are healthy and which ones we use that are not healthy. And again, that's what I like to look at. Is not good, not bad, but healthy, unhealthy, right? Are they working for you in a good way? They're likely healthy. Are they working for you, or rather against you? Likely not healthy. So we want to do less of what's not healthy, more of what is healthy. And so when we look at shutting down, and it's so easy to shut down because we get hurt. We don't feel heard. We don't feel seen. And so we shut down and we retract. Unfortunately, that doesn't solve anything. What that does is often, if there's what's called stonewalling behavior, we actually create a jail cell for ourselves. I call them jail cells because then we get confined in this self-isolation of not feeling good, and we're not going to talk about it, and we're not going to try and work it out, and nobody loves me, and so there. Right? Then the other person who might want to work it out is kind of stuck in a jail cell because they can't come together with us. And worse is if we have two people who shut down on each other, not going to work very well at all. So what we want to do, if we shut down, if that's our go-to mechanism, and trust me, I understand why it's there. It sometimes is like the only place you can be, and sometimes shutting down occasionally is okay. And for a brief period of time, let's say you are in conflict with your partner and you just can't see the forest for the trees and you're feeling reactive, you can absolutely shut down, but in a conscious way. And it's not really so much as shutting down as it is taking a time out. It's okay to say, wait a second, I'm feeling stressed right now. I feel myself getting really reactive. What I'm going to do is take a little time out. And the rules of timeouts are easy. Say where you're going, say what you're doing, and when you'll be back. And then when you come back, try it again. And if things still aren't any better, it's okay to take another time out. And so you might say, hey, I'm going to go to my office for 10 minutes, meditate, journal, whatever I'm going to do. I'll be back and try and work on this with you, in after that, maybe 15 minutes, because I also want to get a cup of tea. And so that's the better way to deal, is to take the space you need to process, to get oriented, and then be willing to come back. Okay? So being willing to come back. And so I hope this is helpful. There is a lot more to cover, and coping strategies and communication strategies, and I have committed to doing this series until the pandemic is finished every Wednesday for approximately 30-35 minutes. So I will be back next Wednesday. If there are topics or points you want me to cover, feel free to email me. Again, this is Dr. Carla Marie Manley. You can find me at drcarlamanley.com. You can find me at Facebook, Dr. Carla Manley, Twitter, Dr. Carla Manley, Instagram, Dr. Carla Manley, LinkedIn, Dr. Carla Manley. And of course, if you have free time during this epidemic, you might want to pick up a copy of Joy from Fear. And Workman Publishing is also, if it's hard for you to find in a bookstore, Workman Publishing is offering a 20% discount right now. So you can go on their website if the book's not available on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, or if you don't have access to an independent bookstore, they may be closed. But there's lots of great work in here. So and lots of insights. So I wish you well. I wish you the very best. And again, I wish for you loving kindness, peace, beauty, serenity. And if you are in a toxic relationship or a toxic environment, reach out for help. You deserve to be loved. You deserve to be honored. You deserve to be respected because you are beautiful. You are divine. You are light, and you deserve to be treated with love. So feel free to email me if you have a topic you'd like me to cover next Wednesday. I will be back, and I'll close with my prayer of loving kindness for you. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be safe from inner and outer danger. May you be well in body, mind, and spirit. And may you be truly happy and free. Namaste, be well, and until next time, take good care of you. Thank you for joining me. And if you like this little episode, feel free to share it, like it, and let's create more love and light in the world together. Thank you for being part of my journey. Bye-bye.